On October 4, 2025, in the heart of Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a sea of supporters and made a declaration that stunned not only his nation, but the entire African continent. His words were not about war, not about gold, not about power. They were about water. In the next 10 years, we will drill 100,000 wells so that no Burkinabe child dies of thirst and no family is forced to abandon their land to the desert. The crowd erupted, but the world stood silent for a moment. A leader in one of the most water-scarce nations on earth had just promised a revolution against drought itself, not a symbolic pledge, but a concrete battle plan against the greatest enemy of the Sahel, scarcity of water. Is it possible? Can a poor landlocked nation facing insurgency, sanctions, and economic struggles truly launch a water revolution? Or is Traoré's bold vision destined to remain a dream, carved in the sand? If you believe that Africa's awakening has begun, stay with us. This is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about survival, sovereignty, and the power of leadership. The announcement of the 100,000 wells project did not come out of thin air. For years, the people of Burkina Faso have lived on the front lines of the climate crisis. The nation lies in the Sahel, a belt of land where the Sahara Desert continues its slow but relentless expansion. Rainfall is erratic, often collapsing in weeks of floods, only to vanish into months of punishing drought. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, more than 70% of Burkinabe families depend on small-scale farming for survival. Yet over the past decade, droughts have destroyed up to 40% of annual harvests in some regions. Wells often dug by hand are either too shallow or quickly dry up. The lack of reliable water has fueled migration, malnutrition, and in some cases conflict. This is the battlefield that President Ibrahim Traoré has chosen. On October 4, 2025, he outlined the first phase of the project, 10,000 wells, to be drilled within 3 years, starting in the regions of Haut's Bassin Cascades and the Sahel Belt. Wells will be powered by solar pumps, reducing reliance on expensive imported fuel. Each well is expected to serve an average of 500 to 800 people, along with nearby farmlands. The government has committed an initial 150 million funded by reallocated military and infrastructure budgets. Critics immediately pointed to the cost. Burkina Faso's annual GDP hovers around $20 billion, and international donors have been hesitant to engage deeply with Traoré's government since he took power in 2022. Yet supporters argue that the project represents not just an investment in infrastructure, but in national survival. Traoré himself framed it this way: if we can spend billions on weapons to fight each other, then we can spend millions to bring water to our people. This is the only war worth fighting, but this announcement is just the beginning. What lies ahead could determine whether Traoré is remembered as a visionary who reshaped Burkina Faso, or as a leader whose dream drowned in the desert sands. And yet this is only the surface of the story. Beneath it lies a deeper struggle between hope and doubt, survival and collapse. The weeks following Traoré's declaration brought a storm of reactions across Burkina Faso and beyond. In villages across Haut's Bassins and Cascades, farmers greeted the announcement with cautious optimism. If the wells are real, it will change our lives, said Issa Kone, a maize farmer near Bobo Dioulasso. For him and many others, water is more than survival. It is the line between famine and dignity. Yet doubt spread quickly. Burkina Faso has a long history of ambitious infrastructure plans that never fully materialized. Previous projects to expand irrigation networks or improve grain storage often collapsed under corruption, lack of funds, or poor maintenance. Opposition politicians seized on this history. Adama Kabore, a critic from the Union for Progress and Change, argued, "We have heard promises before. Where are the guarantees that these wells will not be abandoned after the first photo opportunity?" The financial burden was also under scrutiny. At 150 million for the first phase, skeptics questioned whether the country could sustain such an investment without external backing. Burkina Faso's public debt has already climbed past 50% of GDP, and revenues from gold exports, the nation's largest foreign currency earner, are under pressure from falling global prices. The technical challenges loom just as large. Hydrologists warn that groundwater in many parts of the Sahel is deep and expensive to access. Wells must be drilled to depths of 80, 120 meters, requiring advanced rigs and skilled operators. Moreover, the risk of contamination is high if maintenance lapses. Without proper oversight, wells could become useless within years. Still, what captured attention most was the political gamble. By shifting resources from defense to development, Traoré challenged entrenched power dynamics. Burkina Faso remains in conflict with militant groups across its northern provinces. Critics warned that reducing military spending for wells could expose villages to greater danger. But Traoré's supporters countered that water itself could be a weapon against extremism, offering livelihoods and hope in regions where despair often feeds insurgency. This tug-of-war between urgency and skepticism set the stage for a national debate unlike any in recent memory. And as the project moved from paper to practice, the voices grew louder at home and abroad. Within Burkina Faso, the debate spilled onto radio talk shows, village councils, and marketplaces. Supporters rallied behind the idea of water as liberation. The slogan, 100,000 wells for 20 million lives, began appearing on posters in Ouagadougou. University students marched in support, calling Traoré's project the Second Independence. But opposition voices did not fall silent. Agricultural cooperatives worried about the opportunity costs, with focusing resources on wells overshadow investments in roads, schools, or grain reserves. Some farmers asked a more basic question: if the wells work, who will control them? Experience has shown that local elites often monopolize community resources. Meanwhile, the international response was equally mixed. European Union diplomats cautiously welcomed the initiative, but stressed the need for transparency and independent auditing before any financial support could be considered. China, already investing in infrastructure projects across West Africa, expressed interest in supplying drilling rigs and solar pumps, though some Burkinabe feared this could lead to new forms of dependency. NGOs like WaterAid applauded the vision, but warned of the logistical bottlenecks importing parts, training local engineers, and ensuring long-term sustainability. In the wider Sahel, leaders from Niger and Mali watched closely. If Burkina Faso succeeded, pressure would mount on them to adopt similar programs. If it failed, it would stand as a cautionary tale. The tension also revealed deeper political stakes. Traoré's government has positioned itself as a symbol of the sovereignty, breaking from Western influence while trying to chart a path of self-reliance. For some, the wells represented proof of this philosophy. For others, they were a reckless gamble that could weaken an already fragile state. As one analyst in Ouagadougou put it, these wells are not just about water. They are about the future of Traoré himself, his credibility, his power, and perhaps even his survival as leader. And so, as the drilling rigs began to roll into the countryside, the nation held its breath. Would the promise of water quench the thirst of a people, or would it evaporate under the weight of reality? If Traoré's 100,000 wells project overcomes its obstacles, the rewards could be transformative. At the most basic level, access to reliable water would drastically reduce vulnerability to droughts, which devastate crops in the Sahel every 2 to 3 years. Farmers would be able to shift from subsistence millet and sorghum to higher value crops like vegetables, onions, and mangoes, creating new income streams. Analysts estimate that irrigated farming could increase yields by 200–300%, potentially adding $500 million to Burkina Faso's GDP over the next decade. Beyond economics, this would have cascading social effects. Food security would improve, lowering reliance on imported staples like rice. Rural employment would expand, reducing youth migration to cities or abroad. Women, often responsible for collecting water, would be freed from hours of daily labor, allowing more time for education or business. Politically, success would cement Traoré's image as a transformative leader. By turning barren lands into green fields, he could present himself as the man who gave his people sovereignty, not only from foreign influence, but also from the tyranny of the climate. This narrative could strengthen Burkina Faso's regional influence, inspiring neighboring states to follow its example. On the international stage, success might even reframe the Sahel from being seen as a humanitarian crisis zone to being viewed as a laboratory of climate resilience. Development banks, NGOs, and even skeptical Western powers would find it harder to dismiss a country that had turned desert into farmland. In short, if the wells work, they could be more than water, they could be the foundation of a new national identity. Yet the risks are just as real and perhaps more haunting. Failure would not simply mean dry wells, it could mean shattered trust. If the government spends hundreds of millions and villagers see no water, cynicism could deepen into outright anger. Opposition parties would frame it as proof that Traoré's vision is nothing but grandstanding. Technically, the project could collapse under several pressures: wells running dry if aquifers are overused, pumps breaking down without spare parts or trained mechanics, corruption diverting funds meant for equipment and maintenance. Social consequences could be equally severe. Villages promised water, but left with broken wells may experience unrest. Militants could exploit this disillusionment, presenting themselves as the only reliable providers of resources or justice. Instead of reducing conflict, the failed wells could inadvertently fuel instability. Financially, the loss would be staggering. A failed project could leave Burkina Faso with tens of millions in debt while deterring future investors and donors. International partners might cite the project as proof that self-reliance in the Sahel is unrealistic, undermining the very sovereignty Traoré seeks to defend. Worse, still, failure would not remain contained within Burkina Faso's borders. Neighboring countries already watching closely would treat the collapse as a warning. The dream of desert greening could be discredited for a generation, robbing the Sahel of one of its few hopeful narratives. In the end, failure would mean more than wasted money. It would mean lost faith in leadership, in development, and perhaps even in the possibility of survival in one of the harshest regions on earth. History often remembers leaders not for the battles they fought, but for the futures they dared to imagine. For President Ibrahim Traoré, the 100,000 wells project could become that defining vision, the dream that Burkina Faso could stand on its own feet, nourish its own children and command respect, not through weapons, but through self-reliance. Even today, as the desert winds sweep across the Sahel, ordinary Burkinabe farmers wait with cautious hope. Some still doubt, some whisper that the task is impossible, yet others believe that if even a fraction of those wells succeed, it will change not only their harvest but their destiny. That mixture of skepticism and faith is the true measure of a nation at a crossroads. For older generations in America, watching Africa's struggle, this story may feel familiar. It echoes the great infrastructure projects of the 1930s, when the Tennessee Valley Authority turned rivers into engines of growth during the Great Depression. Just as dams gave hope to rural America, wells might give hope to the Sahel. And just as the TVA became a symbol of resilience for US history, the 100,000 wells could become the story Africans tell their grandchildren about how they survived climate collapse. But the question remains, will this project endure, or will it join the long list of broken promises? The answer lies not in foreign aid, not in outside investors, but in the determination of Burkinabe themselves. That is Traoré's gamble, that his people are ready to rise with him. As we close, consider this. Do you believe Ibrahim Traoré's vision is the dawn of a new Africa, or just another mirage in the desert? If you believe that Africa deserves leaders who dare to dream big, share this video. If you believe that the truth matters more than headlines, subscribe and join us for the next story of Africa's awakening. For months, critics insisted that President Ibrahim Traoré's 100,000 wells project was doomed to fail. They pointed to the lack of financing, the enormity of the desert, and the instability of the Sahel. Yet in late September 2025, a surprising announcement shook both supporters and detractors. An unprecedented alliance of African and Middle Eastern partners pledged to back Burkina Faso's bold vision. Reports confirmed that Morocco, already a leader in solar irrigation and desalination, offered technical expertise and mobile solar pump systems. The United Arab Emirates, hungry for agricultural partnerships in Africa, committed initial funding for 10,000 wells, framing it as both an investment and a diplomatic gesture. Even Senegal's own engineers joined the effort, proposing to share knowledge from their successful water harvesting programs. This unexpected cooperation flipped the narrative. What had seemed like an isolated quixotic effort suddenly became a regional cause. Media across Africa began to ask, is Burkina Faso about to lead the Sahel into a new era of water independence? The twist was not just in the money or technology, it was in the symbolism. For the first time in decades, African nations were not waiting for Europe or the World Bank. They were looking to each other, pooling knowledge and betting on their own resilience. But this shift also brought tension. Would outside partners demand control? Would Traoré's nationalist stance bend under foreign influence? Those questions set the stage for the second twist. With foreign partners now circling the 100,000 wells project, the balance of power shifted overnight. Western institutions, which had dismissed Traoré as an inexperienced populist, suddenly faced the prospect of losing influence in the Sahel. By early October 2025, French and EU diplomats quietly expressed concern. If Burkina Faso succeeded, it might embolden other African nations to reject traditional aid structures and chart their own path. Inside Burkina Faso, the stakes grew even higher. Opposition leaders accused Traoré of selling out to Gulf investors, warning that land and water rights might fall under foreign control. Meanwhile, rural farmers saw the wells as their last chance at survival, rallying around Traoré as a symbol of defiance against both drought and dependency. The true twist came when Traoré doubled down. In a televised address, he declared that all water infrastructure built under the program would remain under Burkinabe ownership regardless of who financed it. His message was clear: we welcome friends, but we will not surrender sovereignty. This stance electrified his supporters and stunned his critics. Traoré had turned the project into more than an engineering challenge. It became a battle for independence, dignity, and control of Africa's most precious resource, water. By refusing to yield, Traoré elevated himself from a controversial transitional leader to a potential icon of African self-determination. What began as a desperate fight against drought now looked like the foundation of a new African narrative, one where survival and sovereignty walked hand in hand. And so the question lingers: will the 100,000 wells mark Burkina Faso's rebirth or the start of a new geopolitical storm? In the closing frames, the camera sweeps across the parched Sahel, now punctuated by the glimmer of new wells and the laughter of children filling buckets with clear water. What once seemed impossible is now unfolding before the eyes of the world. President Ibrahim Traoré's 100,000 wells project is not simply about infrastructure, it is about survival, dignity, and a nation reclaiming its future. For Burkina Faso, every drop of water carries the weight of independence and the promise of tomorrow. And yet the journey is far from over. Challenges remain: financial burdens, political rivalries, and the harsh hand of nature. But for the first time in decades, millions believe that the desert can be pushed back, that Africa can write its own story of resilience. Traoré himself put it plainly: we did not ask permission to live free. We rose to claim our destiny. If the courage of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart, share this story. Subscribe to follow the journey of an Africa that refuses to bow its head. May God bless Africa, and may Burkina Faso's wells never run dry.